The sun was slipping low behind the rooftops of Silverton, casting gold over manicured lawns and winding roads lined with white picket fences. It was the kind of neighborhood where the mailboxes matched, where porch swings creaked softly in the breeze, and where unfamiliar faces didn't go unnoticed. Marcus Ellison eased into a turn, his hands steady on the wheel of his father's restored 1972 Lincoln Continental. The car purred like a memory, smooth, confident, unapologetically black. Its glossy black finish caught every last light from the setting sun. He wore a tailored navy suit, the badge-shaped lapel pin on his chest catching flashes of gold. A quiet authority sat in his posture, not cocky, not hardened, just certain. The leather seat smelled faintly of cedar oil and age. His father's scent. He rolled down the window. The spring air carried a sweetness, honeysuckle and something distant, like rain waiting to fall. His tie was loosened, top button undone, city meeting badge tucked into the inside pocket of his jacket. No one knew yet. Not officially. The appointment wasn't being made public until next week. But after 10 years rising through the department, after every closed door and silent nod, he had made it. Chief of Police. Marcus glanced in the rear view. The cruiser was still behind him. Same one from the gas station. He wasn't speeding. The registration was clean. The taillights worked. Still Marcus felt it, that slow crawl of suspicion pressing into his spine. He signaled early, stopped fully at the sign, counted to 3. The cruiser mirrored each move, not aggressively, just close enough, just long. Enough. He'd grown used to this kind of shadow. Even now, 3 days into the biggest promotion of his life, he still braced for it. His hands curled tighter on the wheel. He focused on the rhythm of his breath like his father taught him long ago. Calm is survival, his father used to say. Panic is what they expect. He passed a jogging couple. The woman glanced at him, then at the cruiser. Her brow creased, a look he'd seen before. Not worry for him, worry about him. He reached for the stereo and turned it down. No distractions, no excuses. The cruiser stayed. He made a left, longer than needed. Took the scenic route as if to test it. Still there. He could feel the questions forming in that patrol car. What's a black man doing in a car like that? What's he doing here? And worst of all, who does he think he is? The answer was simple. Marcus knew exactly who he was. They didn't. The key. Turn into Maple Ridge felt heavier than usual. The stone sign welcoming residents looked the same as it always had. Elegant, oversized letters carved into polished granite. But as Marcus rolled past, he noticed the shift in eyes. A man watering his lawn froze, garden hose limp in his hand. A child on a tricycle turned and stared. Curtains fluttered shut in the window of the blue Colonial on the corner. He knew this routine. You didn't need sirens to signal alarm. Just skin and a steering wheel. Marcus turned onto Birch Hollow Lane and slowed in front of his temporary rental, the brick house with the porch swing he'd never sat on. He reached into the glove box, pulled out the lease papers, registration, and badge ID, just in case. Then, in the rear view, red and blue lit the dusk. The cruiser's lights flashed. No siren, just a warning burst. His chest tightened, jaw locking with quiet force. He parked, kept his hands on the wheel, and exhaled slowly. Footsteps approached. He glanced in the side mirror. 2 officers. White, young. One hovered near the rear bumper, hand resting lightly on his hip. The other stepped forward. "Evening, sir. Do you live here?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, I just moved in." The officer glanced at the car, then back at Marcus. "Mind if I see your license and registration?" "No problem," Marcus said evenly. "My license is in my wallet. My registration's right here." He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible at all times. He handed over both documents, then added, "There's also a city badge inside my jacket, left pocket." The officer didn't react, just took the documents and stepped back. Marcus waited, watching the porch light flicker on across the street. A neighbor appeared in the window, another set of eyes. No one waved. The second officer shifted near the trunk, whispered something into his shoulder mic. Minutes stretched. The first officer returned. Cars registered to a Marcus Ellison. That's me. You say you just moved here? Marcus gave a tight nod. Correct. I'm with the department. Which department? Marcus paused. Then, slowly, clearly, he answered. Law enforcement. A beat of silence passed between them. The officer stared harder now. You some kind of detective? Marcus looked him dead in the eye. Chief. The word landed with a quiet weight that didn't settle. The officer blinked, unsure if he heard. Right? Then he stepped back. No apology, no change in tone, just a clipped, "Have a good night, sir." Marcus watched them walk back to the cruiser, and he sat there, alone, hands still on the wheel, heart steady, but tired. So very tired. This was supposed to be his new beginning, but even now, in the quiet of his own driveway, he wasn't just a man. He was still a question, still a suspicion, still being asked to prove he belonged. He sat in the car for another minute, maybe two. The cruiser turned the corner, disappearing into the dusk like a ghost that had made its point. Marcus stared straight ahead, the engine still idling, the glow from the dashboard soft against his skin. Finally, he turned the key, cutting the motor. The silence pressed in. As he stepped out, he adjusted his tie out of habit. A performance, even when no one was watching. The porch creaked under his weight as he climbed the steps. He unlocked the door, entered the house, and set his badge on the kitchen counter with more force than intended. The house was quiet, too quiet. He stood in the hallway, staring at nothing for a long while. Then he walked to the dining room where a box still sat unopened, labeled Dad's Things. He pulled it open and found the photo frame near the top. His father in full uniform, arms slung over Marcus's shoulder, both smiling like they had already won the world. Tonight, Marcus didn't feel like a winner. He felt like a warning. But he would show up tomorrow, and the next day, because the badge on his chest wasn't just a symbol of rank, it was a promise, and he wasn't done keeping it. He looked out the window one last time before heading upstairs. The night was still. The streetlights hummed, and somewhere, deep inside, Marcus knew, this wasn't just about him anymore, it never had been. He turned off the lights, let the stillness settle in, and whispered to the dark, "Tomorrow, I lead." The house held his voice like a vow. And outside, the cruiser did not return. But the feeling did, always just beneath the surface. The cruiser didn't drive off. Instead, it rolled forward, slow, deliberate, until it stopped just behind Marcus's parked car. The engine idled for a few seconds, and then the door creaked open. Marcus didn't look back, not yet. Firm rap came against the driver's side window. He lowered it halfway and kept both hands on the wheel. "Evening, sir," the officer said. "Step out of the vehicle for a moment." No reason, no explanation. Marcus turned his head slowly. The officer, early 30s, square jaw, buzz cut, offered a look that wasn't quite hostile but wasn't welcoming either. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked. "We got a report about a suspicious vehicle in the neighborhood," the officer replied. "In, front of my house?" Marcus asked, voice calm. The officer didn't flinch. "We just need to verify a few things. Step out for me." Marcus exhaled through his nose. He unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. As he stepped out, the second officer, who had been lingering behind the cruiser, moved to the passenger side. "What's your name, sir?" The first officer asked. "Marcus Ellison. And this your car?" "It is." "Can you prove that?" Marcus gestured to the open glove box. "Registration's right there, and my ID is in the breast pocket of my jacket." The officer nodded, toward the other. "You mind grabbing that?" The second officer walked over, more wary now. He didn't reach into the car. Instead, he said, "Can you pull it out yourself? Slow?" Marcus nodded. "Of course." He retrieved the ID and held it out. The second officer scanned it, his brows pinching. "Do you live here?" the first one asked again. "Yes, I just moved in." "You got anything in the trunk we should know about?" Marcus blinked. "Excuse me?" Do you have anything in the trunk that might be dangerous? No. Mind if we take a look? Marcus hesitated, jaw tight. Is this a routine stop? Officer? The officer shrugged. Just being thorough. Marcus stepped back, nodding once. Go ahead. The officer moved to the trunk and popped it open. Marcus watched as gloved hands rifled through bags, a small briefcase, even the emergency kit. There was nothing to find, but that didn't stop them from pretending to look. The second officer returned to stand beside Marcus. His hand hovered near his belt, fingers brushing the holster in a rhythm Marcus knew too well. Mind telling me what you do for a living? The officer asked. Marcus didn't answer right away. He locked eyes with the man, then said, Why does it matter? Just trying to understand how you're affording this car. The officer replied, glancing at the Lincoln with a hint of something sour in his voice. Marcus breathed in deeply. I work in law enforcement. The officer's expression shifted. Barely. You a detective or something? I said I work in law enforcement, the first officer returned. Trunk's clean. The second officer nodded but didn't step away. Instead, he tilted his head. You don't sound too happy to cooperate. Marcus clenched his jaw. I've cooperated since the moment you pulled up. You got a problem with us doing our job? I have a problem with being presumed criminal for existing in front of my own house. That did it. The first officer's hand moved fast. Turn around. Marcus didn't move. I said, turn around, sir. Am I being arrested? You're being detained until we verify who you are. I gave you my ID. Do it now. He turned. The cuffs went on. Not tight, not rough, just firm enough to tell him where he stood. He stood on the sidewalk, arms cuffed behind his back, the weight of steel digging into the bones of his wrists. His suit, tailored just days ago, now wrinkled and creased under the force of restraint. Across the street, porch lights flicked on. A woman stepped out holding a phone. Not to help, just to film. A man leaned against his mailbox, whispering to someone inside. A group of teens paused there. Bikes at the corner. One raised a phone, then lowered it. But it was the boy, maybe 14, maybe younger, on the opposite curb that cut through him. He stood frozen, backpack slung over one shoulder, books clutched to his chest, his wide eyes locked with Marcus's. Not in curiosity, but in something much deeper. Recognition. Marcus knew that look, because once, long ago, it had been his, a silent scream for a version of justice that never came. The second officer radioed something in. The first stood near Marcus, not speaking. The boy stepped back, disappeared into his doorway. Marcus stared at the ground. The sidewalk was clean. No cracks, no dirt. Just polished concrete under expensive homes. He remembered sweeping this same kind of street with his dad in summer. Just boys trying to earn tips. Back then, they didn't expect much. But he had worked for everything he had. And still, here he was, held like a threat, with nothing but his own breath and history to hold him up. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio. Marcus couldn't hear every word, but he caught his name. Then came the shift. The officer holding the mic paused, turned his head slowly toward Marcus, and looked, really looked. He stepped away, whispered to his partner. Their expressions changed. Not shame, not apology, just unease. A hint of fear, maybe. Not because they'd cuffed a man unjustly, but because they'd cuffed the wrong one. The first officer cleared his throat. Sir, Chief Ellison, we're just following protocol. Marcus said nothing. The cuffs came off. One of them muttered something about misunderstanding and standard procedure. The other stared at his shoes. Marcus adjusted his sleeves, rolled his shoulders back, and straightened his spine. He looked at them. I told you who I was. We had to verify. You didn't believe me. The silence held. A breeze rustled the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Marcus turned without another word and walked back to his house. He didn't slam the door, didn't call the mayor, didn't scream. He just stood in his foyer, the quiet pressing into his chest like the weight of decades. The boy across the street peeked out through the blinds. Marcus didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just stood. Still, cuffed in the eyes of the world, even if his wrists were free. He made it to the living room before the tears came. Not loud, not visible. Just heat behind the eyes, the kind that doesn't fall but stings. He sat on the couch and unbuttoned his cuffs. The fabric had creased at the wrists. He smoothed them slowly, as if the motion could erase everything. His phone buzzed. A text from the mayor. "Heard there was a situation, call me." He didn't respond. Another from the deputy chief. "We'll handle it internally. Let's not overreact." Marcus put the phone down. Overreact. He wanted to laugh, but nothing came. What would have happened if he hadn't had the badge? If the call to dispatch had gone unanswered? If they hadn't recognized the name? How many others had sat on this? Same curb, hands behind their backs without the luxury of explanation? How many names never made it to dispatch? He stood and walked to the bathroom mirror. His tie was still straight, his face unreadable. But his eyes told the story. He wasn't ashamed, he was exhausted, and he knew this wasn't an incident. It was a reminder that the title didn't change the truth, that for men like him, the road home would always run through suspicion. He took a deep breath and whispered, "Not this time." Then he opened his journal and began to write. The pen felt heavier than usual in his hand. Marcus stared at the blank page for a long time, the lines blurring slightly. Then slowly, he began to write. Not about the officers, or the humiliation, or even the boy who saw it all. He wrote about a promise he made years ago in a police academy locker room, staring into a cracked mirror, swearing he'd change things from the inside. He wrote about his father, who never lived to see him wear the uniform. About the conversations they had in whispers after dinner, about pride, about fear, about how to hold your head up when the world kept trying to bow it for you. And he wrote about tonight, how it didn't break him, but it made something clear. The system didn't care about titles. It only recognized fear, control, and assumptions that came wrapped in uniforms and silence. Marcus closed the journal and set it on the table. He walked to the front porch, sat down on the swing for the first time, and watched the neighborhood breathe. A soft wind moved through the trees. A porch light flickered across the street, and then he saw him, the boy, standing on the sidewalk again, still holding that same worn backpack. Their eyes met. Marcus nodded once. This time, the boy nodded back. A small moment, but one that mattered. He didn't need to say anything. The boy had seen enough. Marcus whispered to himself, "They'll never see it coming." And for the first time that night, he smiled, because tomorrow, the real work would begin. Inside, the clock struck midnight. Marcus stood up, stretched his shoulders, and turned off the porch light. He didn't need it anymore. He had already been seen. Back in the hallway, he passed the box labeled Dad's Things. He placed his hand on the lid, just for a second, enough to feel the weight of it all. Then he headed upstairs. Footsteps. Steady. In the bedroom, he laid his suit across the chair, smoothed the fabric with care, and paused before turning out the light. Tomorrow, he would walk into that station, not as the officer they once doubted, but as the leader they couldn't ignore. He wasn't just wearing the badge now. He had earned it in ways they'd never understand, and he would wear it, for the ones who couldn't. He whispered again to the dark, for no one to hear but himself. They thought they were stopping a man in a car. He pulled the covers back, slid into bed, and closed his eyes. But they woke a storm instead. The neighborhood slept, unaware of the shift that had just begun. Tomorrow, nothing would look different, but something under the surface had moved, cracked, made room for something new. And Marcus, he wasn't just preparing to lead a department. He was preparing to change a narrative, one action at a time, one policy, one hard conversation, one boy watching from the curb. The storm had arrived quietly, but it would not leave the same way. History was watching. He answered. Marcus didn't. Look back as he drove away. The cuffs had been removed, but the sting remained. Not in the wrists, in the silence. the kind that hums beneath your skin long after the moment has passed. His tires rolled over the quiet streets of Maple Ridge, the same streets he'd imagined walking through with pride. Now they felt like glass underfoot. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't call anyone. He just drove. By the time he pulled into the garage and shut the door behind him, the air inside the car felt too tight. He sat there, gripping the wheel, long after the engine cut off. The hum in his chest wouldn't stop. Upstairs, the lights were still on in the hallway. He walked past them without flipping a switch. Each step felt heavy, like dragging history behind him. His phone vibrated on the counter. He glanced at the screen. Texts from colleagues, short and careful. Heard what happened, you good? Let's talk tomorrow, don't do anything rash. Not a single one said, I'm sorry. He tossed the phone face down and opened the freezer. Poured 2 fingers of bourbon into a glass and didn't bother with ice. He took it to the back porch, sat down, and looked up at the sky. No stars tonight, just clouds. He sat there in the dark, remembering. He was 10 the first time he saw his father in handcuffs. It was broad daylight, outside a corner store on Jefferson. They'd just bought Gatorades after washing cars for 5 hours straight. A white officer claimed his father matched a vague description. Dark clothes, tall, suspicious. It didn't matter that Marcus had been there the whole time, or that his father was holding a bucket and sponge. They still cuffed him. When they got home, his mother didn't cry. She paced. Then she took Marcus into the kitchen and gave him the talk. Not about girls or grades, but about survival. If they stop you, she'd said, eyes locked on his, you keep your hands visible. You don't raise your voice. You don't run. You don't make sudden moves. You come home. That's the win. Years later, during the police academy, Marcus almost quit. Not because of the drills or the coursework, but because of the silence. The jokes made in locker rooms, the code words, the shift in tone when his name came up on the roster. He stayed because his father told him, be the one who breaks the cycle. Tonight, the cycle broke something in him instead. The next morning, the mayor called. I heard what happened, she began, her tone all business. Look, we're in a delicate spot. The city's been through enough tension lately. I need you to trust that we'll handle this. Marcus said nothing. You don't have to say anything publicly. Just let it pass, it'll blow over. Blow over, Marcus said quietly. I mean, people forget, and your silence will show leadership, maturity. He almost laughed, but the sound caught in his throat. Maturity would have been them, not cuffing me on my own street. A pause. I understand how it looked, Marcus, I really do. But I'm asking you to consider the bigger picture. You're our first black chief. That means something. It means I'm supposed to eat injustice. For the sake of optics? She didn't answer that. When he hung up, Marcus stared at the screen for a long time. Then he deleted the call log. Not out of anger, out of clarity. He knew where he stood. Back at the station, the tone had shifted. Officers passed him in the halls with polite nods. Some offered shoulder pats, but no one asked how he was. No one mentioned what happened. It was like they were pretending it hadn't. Worse, like they hoped he would. At roll call, his voice didn't shake. His posture didn't falter. He led with professionalism, just like always. But afterward, as the room emptied, no one stayed. Behind, not even Khalil, the one officer he thought understood. He waited a few seconds longer, hoping for someone to break the silence. No one did. Back in his office, the walls closed in. The photographs on the wall, graduation, community awards, smiling kids, felt like someone else's memories, a different version of him. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out the envelope he'd tucked away months ago. Inside was a letter he'd written during his first week as chief, a speech he never gave. It began, "Today, we change what justice looks like." He tore it in half. That night, at home, he stood in front of the mirror, still in uniform, still, trying to hold it all together. He reached for the clippers. He hadn't touched his beard in years. It had become part of him, a quiet symbol of strength, inherited from his father, who wore his like armor. But tonight, he needed something to give. The buzzing filled the bathroom like a siren. He watched tufts of hair fall into the sink, each pass of the blade peeling away a layer he hadn't realized he was hiding behind. When it was done, he looked up. He didn't feel stronger, he just felt bare. He didn't sleep much that night. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional creak of the house settling into silence. But inside his mind, nothing settled. He wondered if it had all been a mistake. Had he really thought he could change this from within, that the badge would protect him, that progress was possible through patience and policy? The hardest part wasn't the disrespect. It was the betrayal. He had defended the department in public interviews, in city council meetings, even to his own family. He had worn the uniform like it meant something. He had believed in the promise of reform, and still, when the moment came, he wasn't seen as a leader. He was seen as a threat. Just another black man in the wrong car, in the wrong place, with the wrong skin. He got up around 4 a.m., made coffee he didn't drink, and stood by the window watching the streetlights fade into morning. At sunrise, he went back to the bathroom, touched his chin. It felt unfamiliar, like someone else was, staring back. Someone who had been stripped down, not broken, but close. And in that stillness, he asked himself the question he'd been avoiding all night. Do I stay? He didn't have the answer yet. But something stirred when he walked past his bookshelf later that morning and noticed a journal tucked between two community policing manuals. It was his father's. He hadn't opened it in years. He sat on the edge of the couch and flipped through the worn pages, yellowed with time and scribbled with looping cursive. One entry caught his eye. The day they cuffed me in front of Marcus, I thought I'd failed him. But when I saw him stand straighter, speak clearer, walk prouder, I knew he'd learned the truth. That dignity doesn't come from how the world treats you. It comes from refusing to let them take your soul with their suspicion. Marcus closed the book and held it to his chest. His phone buzzed. This time it wasn't the mayor. It was a message from Tyson, the boy across the street. I saw what they did. My dad said it was wrong. But you looked strong. Just wanted you to know. A single tear rolled down Marcus's cheek. It wasn't everything, but it was something. And, for now, something was enough. He stood, poured the cold coffee down the sink and opened the window. Morning air swept in. Cool, clean, unburdened. He wasn't healed, but he wasn't hiding either. That evening he called his mother. She answered. On the second ring, her voice as steady as it had always been. You all right, baby? He paused, letting the silence stretch between them. No, he finally said, but I will be. There was a rustle on the other end, then the soft clink of her stirring tea. I saw the clip online, she said. Someone from the church sent it. Marcus leaned against the porch railing. I didn't want you to see that. I didn't need to, she replied. I've seen it all before. Your father lived it, I lived it. The only difference now is you're the one wearing the badge. He swallowed hard. I thought it meant something. It does, to us. That's why it hurts. They sat with that truth for a while, neither rushing to fill the silence. I wanted to quit, Marcus admitted. Then quit, she said plainly. But don't do it to make them comfortable. Do it if your soul needs rest, otherwise I stay. Stay and be the mirror they don't want to look into. Marcus closed his eyes. A breeze picked up. The porch swing creaked. Thanks, Ma. Don't thank me, she said. Just keep showing up. He hung up and stared at the sky, a few stars finally breaking through the cloud cover. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but he'd be there to face it. The next morning, Marcus arrived. Before sunrise, he walked the empty halls, his footsteps echoing through the station like a quiet declaration. He posted a new notice on the department bulletin board. It wasn't an official memo, just a quote printed in bold. We don't change the world by being invisible. We change it by being seen and standing anyway. He didn't wait to see who read it. By noon, an officer knocked softly on his door, then another, then a clerk. not to offer apologies, but to ask questions, honest ones. And for the first time in days, Marcus felt something shift. Not in the system, not yet, but in the people inside it. He knew the road ahead would still be hard, lonely even. But now he had a voice, and more importantly, he had a reason to use it. As he sat behind his desk, pen in hand, he didn't write another speech. He started a plan, one that didn't ask the system for change, but demanded it, one that didn't wait for permission to protect dignity, because Marcus Ellison hadn't just survived the weight of the badge, he had redefined it, and this time he wasn't carrying it alone. Outside the station, a soft rain began to fall, quiet, steady, unshaken. Marcus stepped out, lifted his face to the sky, and let it wash over him, not as a cleansing, but as a reminder. Storms don't erase scars. They feed the roots beneath them. Still, the station buzzed with quiet unease. Conversations that used to fill the hallways now stopped when Marcus walked by. But he didn't shrink under the weight of their silence anymore. Something inside him had shifted. Not anger, not pride, just clarity. As he turned the corner toward his office, he heard a voice behind him. "Chief Ellison?" He stopped, turned. Ms. Carla Jennings stood there, holding a worn binder and a look that was equal parts steel and softness. She'd been with dispatch for over 3 decades, seen more chiefs come and go than anyone else in that building. She stepped closer, lowered her voice. "I was on comms that night," she said. "I heard every word." Marcus nodded once, unsure what to say. She glanced around, then leaned in. We all did. Radio was lit up. Some pretended they didn't recognize your voice. But I did. Her gaze sharpened. "You were calm, controlled. You saved their careers by not escalating. But you shouldn't have had to." He looked down. "You have more ears on your side than you know," she said. "Don't let their whispers fool you." Marcus breathed in slowly. "Thank you." Carla offered a small nod. "You're not alone, even when they want you to feel like it." By the following day, the clip had made its rounds. Someone had filmed it, maybe a neighbor, maybe a teen. The video was grainy but clear enough. 2 officers detaining a calm, well-dressed black man in front of his own house. The man didn't resist. He spoke with clarity, restraint. One line echoed in every comment thread. "I told you who I was." The internet didn't stay quiet. Some comments called it a misunderstanding. Others justified the stop, but many were furious. They called it what it was: humiliation, bias, racial profiling wrapped in protocol. Local news picked it up, then regional outlets, then the morning talk shows. By lunchtime, the department was flooded with calls, some angry, some confused, some simply demanding accountability. The city's official press office issued a cautious statement calling the incident under review. Inside the station, tension rippled like a silent wave. No one talked about it directly, but no one could avoid it. Marcus didn't flinch. He walked taller, because outside the echo chambers and inbox floods, something else was happening too. Support was blooming. Quiet at first, then louder. Local pastors reached out. A black veteran officer who'd retired a decade ago called and said, "Son, I've waited 40 years for someone like you." Students from the local high school organized a walkout. Signs filled the front lawn of the municipal building. "Cuffed for existing. Our chief, our voice. We saw everything." Marcus watched it unfold from his office window. He didn't smile. He didn't cry, but something inside him unlocked. Later that afternoon, Officer Khalil Brown stopped by. He hovered at the doorway like a man deciding whether to stay or flee. Finally, he stepped in. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said. Marcus nodded to the chair across from him. "Sit." Khalil did, eyes on the floor. "I should have said something sooner that night after it happened. I didn't know how." Marcus said nothing, giving him space. Khalil cleared his throat. "But I saw the video. And the thing is, if you choose to speak, if you choose to say something, I'll stand behind you. No more silence. Marcus studied him. You sure about that? Khalil nodded. This badge has rules, but I still know right from wrong. It wasn't a grand moment, no dramatic speeches, just truth shared in a quiet room. Marcus extended his hand. Khalil took it. In that grip, something shifted. Not power, not politics, just people. Men who understood what it meant to stand in fire and not flinch. Marcus stood on the doorstep for a full minute before knocking. He didn't know exactly what he was going to say. He just knew he needed to be there. Tyson opened the door. He was taller than Marcus remembered, though it had only been a few days. His eyes flicked up in surprise, then settled into a quiet mix of respect and uncertainty. Hey, Marcus said. Tyson nodded. Hi. Can I come in for a second? Tyson stepped aside. His mother called out from the kitchen. Tyson shouted back, It's Chief Ellison. She offered a warm but cautious hello. They sat at the small dining table. I saw you that night, Tyson said after a moment. I mean, everyone saw it now, but I saw it then, before the phones. Marcus nodded slowly. I know. I used to want to be a cop, Tyson said, ever since I was little. The words hit Marcus like a gut punch. I liked the idea of helping people. I thought if I wore the uniform, I could protect people who looked like us. But then I saw you, and I thought, if they did that to you, what chance would I have? Marcus looked him in the eyes. You still have a chance. You can still choose to be the difference. Tyson frowned. Even after that? Especially after that, Marcus said quietly. Back at home, the house was quiet. Marcus stood in the kitchen, fingers resting on the edge of the counter, letting the weight of Tyson's words settle. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until it escaped in a shaky exhale. He walked to his office, pulled open the drawer, and reached for a clean sheet of paper. No title, no fancy headers, just truth. He started slow, letting the words find him. They didn't roar, they flowed, steady and honest. To those who wear the uniform, to those who stand beside us, and to those we serve, I write not out of anger but out of obligation. He poured himself into every line. The pain, the betrayal, the resolve, the responsibility. He didn't write it for the news cycle. He wrote it for Tyson, for Khalil, for Ms. Carla, for his father, for every cuffed wrist that wasn't recorded, and every voice that was dismissed. When he finished, he sat back, hands trembling slightly. Not with fear, but with readiness, the kind that comes when you stop waiting for permission to be whole. He read the statement once more, then saved it, printed a copy, folded it neatly. Tomorrow, he'd release it to the press, but tonight, he allowed himself to breathe. The next morning, Marcus walked into City Hall with the folded paper in his hand. He didn't need a press agent. He didn't wait for the mayor's approval. He handed the statement directly to the clerk and said, Make copies, one for every major outlet. Post the rest on the community board. The clerk blinked, nodded, and took it with both hands. By noon, it was everywhere. Headlines flooded social media. Police chief breaks silence. Ellison speaks truth to power. Justice wears a new face. Some praised him. Some called it betrayal. Some warned it would cost him everything, but Marcus didn't flinch, because this wasn't about applause or backlash. It was about reclaiming his name. That evening, he returned to the precinct after hours. The halls were quiet, shadows long. On the bulletin board near the break room, someone had pinned a copy of his statement. Underneath it, a post-it in neat handwriting read, Thank you for saying what we couldn't. KB Marcus stood there for a while. Then quietly, he pinned his father's badge right next to it. Not as a symbol of rank, but of legacy. And for the first time since the stop, he felt like he was no longer standing alone. The rain came that night. Not heavy, just a gentle fall, steady and soft against the windows. Marcus sat on the porch again, same swing, same view, but the weight in his chest had shifted. Across the street, Tyson stood beneath the awning of his front door, hoodies, up, a notebook in his hands. He looked over, raised the notebook, and nodded once. Marcus nodded back. No words, just understanding. His phone buzzed in his lap. More news coverage, messages from allies, critics, strangers. He silenced it. Tonight wasn't for them, he thought. Of Ms. Carla's voice, Khalil's quiet support, his mother's strength, his father's journal. He remembered the boy he once was, watching from a curb, unsure if dignity had a place in uniforms. And now here he sat, changed, bruised, but clearer. He stepped inside, pulled the badge from his desk drawer and held it in his hand. Then he set it beside a fresh sheet of paper and began again. Not with a speech or statement, but a plan. One built not on reaction, but responsibility. Because change didn't start when the cameras showed up. It started with what a man chose. To do the moment the world stopped watching, and Marcus Ellison was just getting started. 3 days later, the city council requested a closed-door meeting. Marcus entered the chamber in full uniform, not because he needed to remind them who he was, but because he had finally remembered it himself. The mayor looked nervous. A few council members avoided eye contact, but he didn't come to argue. He came to listen and to lead. "We brought you here to discuss the implications of your statement," one councilman began. "There's been backlash, a lot of it," Marcus nodded. "I expected that. It's complicated," another added. "Some officers feel exposed." Marcus didn't flinch. "I felt exposed too, on the curb, in front of my home. That was complicated." Silence. Then he leaned forward. "I'm not here to relive that night. I'm here to ask what we do next. Because I won't carry a badge for a department that doesn't confront its own silence." The room was still. Then a voice spoke from the back. "Councilwoman Rivera, I support you, Chief." One by one, heads began to nod. Not all, but enough. Afterward, in the hallway, a young intern caught up with Marcus. "Sir," he said breathlessly, "I just wanted to say my brother's in the academy. He almost quit. But after your letter, he's staying." Marcus smiled, and for the first time in weeks it felt real. Later that night, Marcus returned to his office. The station was mostly empty, lights dimmed, footsteps minimal. On his desk sat a folder labeled Reform Draft. Inside were notes he'd been collecting for years, policies he'd once thought too idealistic, too bold. Now, they felt necessary. He pulled out a pen and began writing. Mandatory bias training, an anonymous officer complaint line, body cam, reviews with community input, cultural history seminars, recruitment from local high schools. Not tomorrow. Now. And when he finished drafting, he didn't close the folder. He left it open, visible, for anyone who might walk in next. Before locking up, he returned to the bulletin board and reread his quote. Beneath it, another anonymous note had been added. "If you stand, we'll follow." He left the building just as the rain began to clear. The sky opened enough to reveal a few stars. Tyson was outside again, sitting on his stoop, sketching in his notebook. Marcus crossed the street, paused and asked, "What are you drawing?" Tyson grinned. "A new badge, one that looks like yours." Marcus sat beside him, quiet. The night didn't need more words. It had already heard the truth, and truth once spoken never goes quiet again. Marcus stood, looked out at the street, and let the weight of the moment settle gently on his shoulders, not as a burden but as a charge. The wind stirred around him, not fierce but steady, like the heartbeat of something just beginning. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old journal page he'd carried for years, now creased and worn. On the back, he scribbled a single line. "Start where they said you couldn't." Then he tucked it into Tyson's notebook, patted his shoulder, and walked home beneath the stars. Still standing, still moving forward. The auditorium was packed. Rows of folding chairs lined the community center gym, flanked by cameras, tripods, and restless murmurs. Reporters scribbled notes. Uniformed officers sat stiffly near the front. Residents filled the back, some arms crossed, some hands clasped, others just watching. Marcus stood behind the podium in full dress uniform. The gold badge over his heart reflected the harsh lights, but his eyes stayed calm, steady. He had no papers in front of him, no teleprompter, just the silence of expectation. He glanced around the room, pausing briefly when his eyes landed on Tyson, standing beside his mother. In the back row, the boy's face was unreadable, but his posture was alert, present. Marcus took a breath. "When I became chief," he began, voice firm, "I made a promise to protect, to serve, and to lead." His voice echoed, not loud, but filled with gravity. "And last week I stood on the curb outside my home, in a suit with my badge and my wallet, and I was handcuffed." A hush swept across the room. I told them who I was. It didn't matter. He stepped out from behind the podium. "I'm not here to relive that moment for sympathy. I'm here because that moment was not isolated. It was a mirror." He walked slowly across the stage, his voice steady. "I've worn this uniform for 18 years. I've led men and women with honor. I've buried colleagues, consoled families, and sat in too many living rooms explaining why justice didn't arrive in time. And still I was seen first as a threat." He turned toward the crowd. "Some of you have asked why I didn't speak out sooner. Why now? Why this?" He paused. "Because this isn't about me. This is about every time someone was stopped for looking out of place. Every time a voice was silenced by a badge meant to serve it. Every time a system told us to wait." Murmurs rippled across the room. "This department is not broken because of 2 officers. It is broken because silence has been standard protocol." A reporter raised her hand. He didn't call on her. Marcus looked to the side of the room where several officers sat. "Some of you know what I'm talking about. You've seen it. You've felt it. And you've said nothing. I forgive you. But I will not protect you from accountability." He let the words settle. There was no anger in his voice, just a weight that pulled everyone still. Marcus stepped back toward the microphone, his voice lower now, more intimate. "This wasn't the first time," he said. "Not even close." People leaned forward. "As a lieutenant, I was stopped outside my own precinct because someone thought I didn't belong. I was followed home once, even with my badge on my belt. Each time I told myself it was an anomaly, that I just had to rise higher, earn more, speak clearer." He paused. "But you don't earn your way out of being profiled. There's no rank that makes you immune to suspicion when the system itself is designed to question your right to exist." Silence thickened. "And yet, I still believe this department, this city, this country can do better. But only if we tell the truth." He turned again to the officers. "You took an oath, not to silence, but to justice, not to comfort, but to service, then to the crowd, and to the community. This isn't your burden to fix, but your voices are powerful. You've reminded me why I wear this badge." He looked directly at Tyson again. "And you've reminded me who I wear it for." A flicker of something crossed the boy's face. Pride, maybe, or permission to hope. Again. Marcus exhaled slowly. The room felt like it was holding its breath with him. "To the officers who stopped me," he said, voice unwavering, "I forgive you." A sharp intake of breath rippled through the audience. "But I will not protect you from accountability." The words echoed like a verdict. "I know some of you fear what change will bring. I say, fear the cost of doing nothing." He stepped forward again. "This is not about punishment. This is about transformation, about building a force that doesn't just enforce laws but earns trust, that doesn't just respond to crises but prevents them." Reporters' pens scratched wildly across paper. "I won't resign. I won't retaliate. I will rebuild." He placed both hands on the podium. "And I invite every single one of you, officer, resident, student, elder, to help me." A beat of silence, then the sound of clapping, slow, unsure at first, then louder, then rising like a wave crashing through doubt. Marcus didn't smile. Not yet, because the work hadn't begun. But as he stepped down from the stage, Tyson met him halfway, up the aisle, and for the first time since that night, the boy smiled. That was enough. For now. The room was a blur of flashing cameras and hushed conversations. Reporters swarmed around Marcus, firing questions faster than he could answer. He stood calmly, enduring their onslaught. But he could feel the shift in the air, the moment of change. It wasn't just the words he'd spoken. It was the silence that had followed. The same silence that had surrounded his first stop, his first cuffing, his first injustice. But now, it felt different. The silence was no longer a tool of oppression. It was a space for action. The mayor fumbled a response when approached by a reporter. She stumbled through a statement, assuring the press that the city was reviewing the situation. But her words held less weight now. The public had heard Marcus's truth. They had seen his strength, and it wasn't something a political soundbite could undo. Outside, the people who had gathered were no longer a quiet audience. They were loud, unified, and driven by the shared realization that something had to change. Youth leaders, community organizers, even retired officers all showed up, every single one carrying the weight of years of silence, of waiting for someone to speak. Tyson's face wasn't the only one that beamed with pride. The crowd had come alive with a renewed sense of purpose, and as they chanted his name, Marcus felt something he hadn't in a long time: hope. He stepped outside, under the bright lights of the cameras, the sound of applause mixing with the chants of justice for all. His heart beat with a rhythm he hadn't heard in years. The weight of the badge felt less like an anchor and more like a shield. He walked through the crowd, his head held high, and when he reached the edge where Tyson stood with his mother, he stopped. The boy's smile met his. "I meant what I said," Marcus said quietly, bending down to Tyson's level. "You've already done it," Tyson replied. "You showed us we can stand up." Marcus nodded, the weight of his father's lessons fresh in his mind. And then, as if the crowd had been waiting for it, a voice rang out. One by one, they began to shout. They weren't shouting at Marcus anymore. They were shouting for themselves, for their communities, for the ones who had always been silenced. Change is here. Change is now. And in that moment, Marcus knew with certainty that the fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. He wasn't just leading the police department anymore. He was leading a movement. With the last of his strength, Marcus raised his hand, gesturing for quiet. The crowd stilled. He didn't need to say anything more. The work ahead was clear. But for the first time, he wasn't walking it alone. He was walking beside them. And in the distance, he saw his father's proud face in his mind's eye. This time, the badge would mean something real, something earned. It had always been his choice, but now it was the people's choice too. Marcus sat in the quiet of his office, the city lights flickering faintly through the blinds. It had been a long day, filled with meetings and press conferences, but the work had only just begun. The officers involved in the incident were put on administrative leave, a decision that sent ripples through the department. Reforms were being promised, but Marcus knew that the real change wouldn't come from a press release or a political agenda. It would come from the people. His thoughts shifted to the Walk the Block initiative he had launched. It was simple but powerful. Officers would walk the streets, talk to residents, and build relationships. No sirens, no cruisers, just human connection. It wasn't about law enforcement. It was about trust, and trust, Marcus knew, was something that had been broken long ago. The initiative gained traction quickly. Community leaders rallied behind it, and the youth began to take notice. Tyson, the young boy who had witnessed the stop, was one of the first to step forward. He applied for the Junior Police Mentorship Program, eager to make a change of his own. Tyson wasn't just a reminder of the past. He was a symbol of hope for the future. The days blurred together as Marcus worked tirelessly, speaking at schools, attending town hall meetings, and forming alliances with local leaders. It wasn't always easy, and there were days when the weight of the past seemed too much to bear. But every time Marcus felt like giving up, he thought of Tyson and the others who were finally speaking up, no longer willing to remain silent. That kept him going. One evening as the sun began to set, Marcus found himself behind the wheel of his late father's car, the one that had once been a symbol of pride. The same car that had been stopped by officers, the same car that had led to his own humiliation. But tonight, things were different. He wasn't being pulled over. He wasn't being questioned. As he drove through the neighborhood, a cruiser passed by, and Marcus held his breath. But this time, the officer didn't stop him. Instead, the officer waved, a wave, simple, meaningful. Marcus smiled to himself, the tension that had built up for so long easing from his shoulders. He wasn't just the chief of police anymore. He was a part of the community, a symbol of what was possible when people started believing in each other. He parked the car, stepping out into the warm evening air. His mind drifted to the porch where, just weeks ago, he had been watched with suspicion. This time, as he walked down the street, he saw Tyson, no longer a silent observer but a leader in his own right. Tyson was sitting on the porch, tutoring a group of younger kids from the neighborhood. The transformation was evident in the young man's face: confidence, pride, and a willingness to make a difference. Marcus approached the porch, his footsteps slow but sure. He watched for a moment, taking in the scene. Tyson looked up and grinned. "Mr. Ellison," Tyson said, his voice calm but filled with excitement. "I'm just helping them with their homework." Marcus nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "I see that. Keep doing what you're doing, Tyson. You're making a difference." Tyson smiled and turned back to the kids who were now hanging on his every word. Marcus took a step back, silently admiring the young man's growth. In that moment, he realized that the change he had been fighting for wasn't just about reforming the department. It was about empowering the next generation to step into the world and make it a better place. As Marcus walked away, he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. He didn't need the recognition. He didn't need the accolades. What mattered was the work that was finally starting to show results. Back at home, Marcus walked into the living room and paused in front of the mantel. On it, beside his badge, was a framed photograph of his father. His father had taught him so much, had shown him the value of hard work, of fighting for what was right. And now, as Marcus stood there, he realized that everything his father had fought for was coming full circle. He gently placed the photo next to his badge, his fingers brushing the glass as he whispered softly, "Still here. Still rising." It wasn't just a statement to his father. It was a statement to himself, to the community, to everyone who had stood with him, who had believed in the possibility of change. They were all rising together. And in that moment, Marcus knew that the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun.